Thumbs up. Thank you.
We're ready.
Thank you.
Ready? Okay. I now call the December 15th, 2021 Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting to order. Item 3, recognition. We are going to take a few moments to recognize Herb and his 12 years of service on the Zoning Board of Adjustment. Lisa.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So it is my pleasure to, no introductions are needed, maybe for Mr. Schwab here, but just want to take the moment as Mr. Schwab was stepping off, in his 12 years of service on the Zoning Board of Adjustment. Just want to take the opportunity to recognize you. You joined in 2009 as an alternate for several years, and then became a regular member. Yes, voted, and even stepped into the vice chair role for several years as well. So just want to take the opportunity to publicly recognize you. Thank you for your service to the city for your 12 years. I know a lot of the projects maybe that came forward to the Zoning Board of Adjustment during your time weren't necessarily controversial or anything, but I know they were very important. And they were very important to people that were making their case in their application. So they and the city are very
Thank you
to your service. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a real pleasure to have been able to serve on this board, and I really appreciate working with the staff and all you fine people on the board. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Can we get a picture with everyone?
Yeah, sure.
Oh.
So much.
Thank you all.
Yeah, congratulations.
Congratulations. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. No, thank you.
I'll also.
Yeah.
Best wishes. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Are you all holding the notification? I think I'm gonna
Yes.
skip after the 12 year, I'm gonna skip.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Herb. Congratulations.
Bye. Thank you.
All righty. I was going to say something nice about her, but he left. So, so we'll just continue moving forward. Item 4, public hearing, public comment. Members of the public desiring to submit written comments to be read during the public comment or public hearing portions of the meeting will be allowed to submit their comments to the office of the city secretary. Written emailed comments must be received by 3 p.m. Wednesday, December 15th, 2021. Christy, any comments?
No, we did not receive it.
Okay, so no comments. We can continue to move forward to item 5, orientation. And I will turn it over to take Lisa first.
Yes, and really my part will be really brief. That's right, I've got to click. Here we go. So very important role, but just to welcome you all. Thank you for your service. This will be the annual orientation for the Zoning Board of Adjustment. Really just want to take the opportunity to say thank you for spending your evening with us and the evenings that we do meet. I know that is your personal time, but I know the city really does appreciate your service and your willingness to serve your community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug and Laura, and they are going to walk you through the orientation. Just very briefly, these are the different department divisions that make up the Planning and Development Services Department, which is your primary liaison department that supports you. So we have our development planning group, which is led by Doug. We have our long range planning group, which is led by Ruth Lomer. We have our permitting group, which is led by Delane Svatek, and then lastly, our inspections, which is Kenneth Shavers. And so our department really walks through from beginning, big picture thinking, long range planning, all the way to actually building something and getting it inspected to make sure it meets code compliance. So we kind of are the full gamut of development for the city. So with that, I'll turn it over to Doug. Thank you all again for being here and happy to address any questions that you might have.
As Lisa said, we appreciate y'all's service, and we know that many of y'all have heard information on this before. We also have new folks as alternates. So we're going to go through and give the full briefing and again, cover the various scenarios. Laura is going to be then covering the specific types of cases after I just give a few slides here. So basically, your role and our role work together. Our job is to make sure that we review cases, that we present you information for that. We coordinate with other city staff, including our legal department, to make sure that we've prepared everything. And we are your liaison for questions, whether they be email, phone, or in person. On cases. A little bit about your authority. Chapter 211 in the Texas Local Government Code. 211 is basically the authorization for zoning in Texas. And it covers the ins and out of both things that are related to a planning and zoning commission, as well as a zoning board of adjustment. Chapter 212 is another chapter that deals with platting specifically, but this board's focus is zoning. So that's where that initial authority comes from. So under that, you're looking at bulk regulations. And I say that it's not land use. In other words, someone is not able to ask for a variance to put in a business in a residential district or put a house in a commercial district. It's not land use in Texas. It's essentially the bulk regulations, which are how big, the size, setbacks, height, square footage, lot coverage, those types of things that are, the simplest way I think of it is shaping parameters. It's the shaping of it versus the use. Other elements of your authority, the city charter, which sets up what boards and commissions are going to be in the city. The development code, which is the city's essentially a unified code that contains not only the zoning, but subdivision regulations and other codes for development. And then this board has an adopted rules of procedure in accordance with the state of Texas. And we've included that in your actual packet there, just so you have a copy of the most current. And it goes into specifics for that as well. Adopted rules of procedure, as we mentioned, that we provided a copy for, gets into things like swearing in of speakers for cases, gets into the attendance, meeting times, or what's expected, basically, of cases, a little bit about public hearings, all of those types of things. So it is basically your operating guide. And a quorum for a meeting, essentially there must be at least 4 board members for a quorum, but the standard board is 5 with an alternate system. The alternate system is essentially to be able for an alternate to step in place of a regular member so that cases can continue to be held and a quorum is made. 5 members for a meeting is really preferred for action because in case of a person voting against, if 4 of the members vote for it, it still passes. But if there's only 4 present, then all would have to vote for it in order to actually have it pass. So it is one of the reasons for the alternate system as a 5-member board, so that alternates can step in when needed. One of the things that we ask is that alternates sit in on the meetings as a standard practice, and again, not to get discouraged from coming to meetings, because we want to not only have folks ready to serve if they needed, but also to kind of stay familiar with the cases and the themes, even though they wouldn't be at the dais unless called. So that is one of the things that we do ask, that the alternates are there. As we mentioned, to stay in the audience when they're not needed at the dais, and again, just to kind of stay familiar, whether it's special exception, variance cases, or appeals type. So a little bit about behind the scenes. As you know, we make sure to work with the applicants, make sure their packet is complete, to make sure that we have reviewed their information, field investigation, including also review of mapping, aerials, that type of information. Public hearing notice and preparation, we work closely with the city secretary's office on that. And then information that we provide to you, both with the electronic staff report as well as any other materials. And then finally, the presentations. We also want to make sure that if there's any other questions that the board has before a case, that a member checks in with us. If there's something they want to touch base on, we'd be happy to look at both from an email standpoint and or a phone call, or we'd be glad to meet if there's something that comes into play. Finally, the type of cases, I said, variance cases, special exceptions, and appeals. There's also, the board members also serve, technically ready to serve is the Airport Zoning Board of Adjustment. That is something that would be called as a special meeting if for some reason there is a case with that. So the types of cases that you could conceivably hear on the board. I want to go ahead and turn it over to Laura. She's going to take you all through the cases, go into detail about each level and the criteria and those type of things.
Hello. So is that my phone? Okay. So I have graduated to helping out with the orientation this year. So we're going to start out with an overview of variances. These are not as often as special exceptions, but they are very important whenever they do come up. Variances can provide relief from certain bulk and other special zoning regulations. Example, you can get a 5-foot variance or so from a 30-foot setback, and so it could be built at 25 feet instead of 30, things like that. These are not for use variances. You cannot listen to land use. So our zoning districts, you're allowed to do what you're allowed to do, and that's it. There are no variances for that. So this does require a 4 out of 5 vote. The 4 criteria are that a variance is not contrary to public interest, special circumstances or conditions of the land or building, a literal enforcement of the ordinance results in an unnecessary hardship, and that the spirit of the ordinance is observed and substantial justice is done. So we're going to go through these 4 criteria a little more specifically. So criteria 1, that it's not contrary to public interest. Staff does assist with analysis such as public safety and context. So the surrounding setbacks, what's the pattern of development in the area, as well as going through comments from the public as well as other concerns. And this is one of the subjective criteria. Criteria 2 is that there are special circumstances or conditions that apply to the land or the building. This information is provided by the applicant and is presented to the zoning board. Staff analysis can point to potential circumstances or situations. And this again is subjective again. Some prior examples have included a unique lot size, where the existing building is, something that might make the structure different. Different shapes of lots, something that's very shallow or very wide might need something different as well. Criteria 3 involves a literal enforcement of the ordinance, does result in an unnecessary hardship. So this is another subjective criteria. It's a question of what's reasonable compared to necessary or unnecessary. A hardship shouldn't be primarily economic or financial. However, there is a new state law that does provide further guidance on what exactly an unnecessary hardship is. So that is House Bill 1475 that was just passed this year that includes 5 options that can be considered as a hardship. So financial costs greater than 50% of the appraised value of the existing structure if compliance was met. This is a new financial burden that can be considered as a hardship. Loss to a lot of at least 25% of area where development may physically occur if compliance was met. Causing a loss of compliance to other municipal codes if made compliant. This is unlikely to ever be the case. Typically, if you're following our rules, you're not going to violate another rule. Unreasonable encroachment into another property. This again is unlikely to ever occur in Sugar Land. Our codes do not allow for encroachment across property lines. Or the current nonconformity of an existing structure. So this is something that we have seen in the past where a structure is currently non-conforming and they want to build in line with that non-conformity rather than following the new rules. So this is something that we've seen before. Staff will be including any of the new methodology in the staff report if these variances do come up. We do not formally make recommendations on variances, but we do provide information under each of the criteria as well as each of these new elements now for criteria 3 to assist in decision-making. Criteria 4 is that the spirit of the ordinance is observed and substantial justice done. Again, this is subjective. The board needs to weigh the intent of the ordinance against what is actually occurring on the lot. So an example for variances, we do always notify the HOA as well as send out letters to property owners within 200 feet because it does require a public hearing. This is just an example of the map that goes out whenever a special exception or variance goes out. So an example variance case, this is for a commercial site. We haven't had one of these in a couple of years, but here is an example from before I was here. A small lot that was going to be for HOA with a pool and a small parking lot. They requested variances from the parking setbacks in order to be able to make enough parking spaces fit on this small size. So at the back, there was a 20-foot parking setback that would be right here. They asked for a 14-foot variance so that it could only be 6 feet. On the side, there was a 25-foot side parking setback. They asked for that to be only 10 feet, which is a 15-foot variance. And then in the front up here at this very corner, there is a 30-foot parking setback and they requested for a 0 foot setback. So that's a 30-foot variance from what our parking regulations are. And I believe this did pass because of the size of the lot. It's just a very small lot for this. So here is another example of a variance where there was some existing trees, some very old protected hardwood trees that the owner wanted to keep in their lot. So they asked for a variance from the side lot lines in order to be able to move their house over to the side and not have to pull those trees out. So variances can have conditions put on them. You do not have to grant exactly what was requested. You can grant for less than what was requested. So in the instance of the parking lot, they had requested a 30-foot front variance. You could have only granted 15 or so. That is allowed. There are conditions that can be placed as well. Those tend to be either related to compliance or mitigation. So compliance being a site plan or elevations to ensure that the development is in line with what was approved, or mitigation such as buffering, screening, tree protection in order to mitigate any impact on surrounding neighbors. So special exceptions is kind of y'all's bread and butter. That tends to be what you see most of the time. Special exceptions are allowed by Texas statute as a tool for zoning relief. So the cities can choose to utilize them or not. Our city council did authorize this process in 2006 to replace variances for residential lots that were platted prior to being annexed. This does allow property to comply with recorded setbacks. These are typically HOA restrictions or platted setbacks instead of the current zoning setbacks. This does involve compatibility rather than proving a hardship. So the 4 criteria, the first 3 are not subjective. They are, do you meet it or not? And that is that the property was platted prior to annexation or incorporation. The recorded restrictions are less restrictive than current zoning regulations. The special exception would not be less restrictive than what was recorded. And the 4th criteria is the subjective one as far as compatibility. So is the addition detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to the neighborhood in any way? So again, the first 3 pre-annexation platting setbacks are less restrictive, and the request is not less restrictive than the setbacks. Or excuse me, is not less restrictive. These are all verified prior to accepting a special exception application. They will, they're very cut and dry. Staff looks at that. And if these 3 requirements are met, then staff will offer the possibility of a special exception to come before you to address primarily the criteria 4, which is that the addition is not detrimental to public welfare or injurious to property owners within the district or neighborhood. So staff reports do take a look at what this criteria is. We examine public safety, fire access, the context in the surrounding neighborhood. We look at property owners in the area. What are their concerns? How was the property developed? What are the current setbacks in reality versus what zoning is, things like that. We do additional analysis as needed. Sometimes landscaping, architectural things, we do look at that, as well as building materials. Is it compatible with the house itself and the existing houses surrounding it? So an example of our setback analysis, this is what we would look at for the recorded restrictions. We have on one side the recorded restrictions, which in this case is a 20-foot building line in the front yard. And then back here would be an 8-foot utility easement. So that's what would be considered the rear yard setback. And then there's also HOA restrictions. So this is the deed restrictions that are recorded for the property. In this case, there is exactly 15 feet for for interior side property ownerships, things like 5 feet, 15-foot street side. They have to do with fences, garages, the primary house. All of those are typically covered in HOA restrictions, and we follow the addition will have to meet both of them. Whichever is more strict is the one that will be the one that is the special exception. So in this case, the HOA restrictions would be more strict than the platted restrictions, with there being 15 feet rather than 8. So there are 3 options for the ZBA decisions. You can grant it approval, no conditions, no anything. You just you give your stamp of approval if it does meet all 4 requests. You can deny the special exception. So you don't think it's compatible. There's some type of issue, either with compatibility with safety, maybe that it blocks fire access to another lot. It might cause potential flooding to a neighbor because they're not taking care of their drainage, something like that. And then the third option is what we see most often, which is that it is approved, but it has conditions. So those conditions being typically a site plan and elevations in order to make sure that the building materials and location of the addition are exactly what is approved. There's also some other conditions that can always be considered, such as a cap on square footage. You can also, again, grant only partially. So they might request 10 feet, but you only grant 7 feet, but 15 foot is the requirement. And typically, like I said, the inclusion of a site plan and elevations are typically seen as well. So here's an example, special exception that was approved this past summer. The existing structure does not comply with the rear setback. That's here with this garage. The patio cover also would extend into the 15-foot setback itself. But the addition was consistent with existing and neighboring structures. Being a patio cover attached to the garage at the rear of the house is fairly common in this area. So this was granted with the conditions that the site plan and elevations be attached. I just wanted to bring to y'all's attention that there was a development code amendment that was passed this past fall. It's part of why we haven't had a meeting for the past couple months. This amendment allows for administrative approval of patio covers that are between primary and secondary structures. So essentially, a new garage connection to a house no longer has to come before you guys. We can approve it administratively. So this example here is one from earlier this year at Greenfields Drive. This would now be able to be approved administratively because the patio cover is only between the house and the garage. Whereas on the previous screen, this patio cover was itself still in the setback. This would still require coming to you guys. But you will not be seeing any more of these new garage connection cases. So there are a couple areas of board review other than variances and special exceptions that are exceedingly rare. But one of them is appeals. So this provides an outlet for staff or for customers who think that staff is incorrectly interpreting or carrying out regulations. They can appeal this incorrect interpretation to you guys. At that point, the burden of proof is with the applicant, and it requires a 4 out of 5 vote to overturn staff interpretation. And this does set a precedent as well. So in the future, if it does turn out that staff interpretation is considered incorrect, then staff will need to interpret it the new way moving forward. In the last 25 years, there have been 2 appeals, and both of them were denied. So like I said, this is fairly rare, but it is an option. It is something that you guys might potentially hear. Additionally, you guys also operate as the Airport Zoning Board of Adjustment, which is involved in Chapter 9 that establishes our height hazard regulations. If a height variance application is filed and does require FAA determination, again, board decides this. Staff does not make a recommendation. We only make a recommendation for special exceptions. This has never happened in the history of city, but if a request is filed, we will orient y'all a bit, give you a bit more of a workshop to kind of familiarize yourself with exactly what the case is, and before we have the actual case, and as there are no cases pending as of right now. So with that, I'll hand it over to Shay.
Good evening. I am going to talk to you tonight about the Open Meetings Act. Basically, the city's boards and commissions are subject to the Open Meetings Act, which gives the public an opportunity to know what's going on in the city and provides them with an opportunity to attend meetings and potentially speak on items that are on the city's agendas. There are some basic requirements that have to be met in order to comply. Notice of meetings has to be posted 72 hours in advance, and we post that here at City Hall and also on the city's website. The public has to be given notice of the date, hour, place, and subject matter of each meeting, and any decisions or deliberations have to happen in the public meeting. So when it comes to having meetings, at your meetings, you're not allowed or supposed to discuss any item that is not actually listed on the agenda. If someone was to come and make a public comment or speak during a hearing on an item, any discussion has to be confined to an item actually on the agenda. If you were to respond to a member of the public in that situation, you can give factual information or a policy statement, but there can't be any discussion or deliberation amongst the commission on that particular item. So what is a meeting? In order for it to be a true meeting, under the Open Meetings Act, there has to be a quorum, which for this commission is 4 members. There must be public business or issue within the jurisdiction, which there is. There are the special exceptions and variances that you discuss. And then there has to be deliberation. And then for it to be a true meeting, it does have to be open to the public. There are exceptions to deliberations that take place before the public, and that is going to be what's called an executive session. That's where we can actually go from, say, the council chamber back into a different meeting room, and you can have deliberations outside of the public being able to attend. Typically, that happens if you're going to receive advice from the attorney. Council will have those to discuss economic development decisions, but rarely, if ever, would any of your meetings that actually probably require an executive session. Most of your deliberations will just happen in public on the dais. If there were to be an executive session, we would retreat, your deliberations would be in private, then any actual vote on the item would take place back in the council chambers on the dais before the public. All right. The most important thing to be aware of when it comes to the Open Meetings Act is a walking quorum, which is a serial meeting of less than a quorum. Technically, it's an overlapping series of meetings where a quorum is not in the room at the same time. And this could be where maybe there's an item coming up on the agenda and 2 of you happen to discuss it in person. And then one of those people then emailed someone else about it. And then maybe that person met with a 4th member. It's basically if there are some sort of deliberations on an item before the commission where maybe all 4 of you aren't in the same room, there's not a quorum together at the same time, but there has been a series of communications somehow that does result in a quorum having actually discussed or deliberated on an item that's not actually at a public meeting. The biggest thing to watch out for here is the reply all button. If you receive information from staff by email, anything done by email, just be very careful not to accidentally hit the reply all button in case you trigger a series of events where there might be a chain of emails that could somehow make up a walking quorum. All right, so there are some things that are not a meeting. A social function unrelated to public business, if a quorum of you happen to be there, it's not necessarily a meeting. Regional, state, or national conventions or workshops or ceremonial events. If no formal action occurs, any discussion is incidental. But in the event there was a quorum at a function like this, probably for the best just not to discuss any business that might be before the commission. All right. Why does this matter? Because there are civil and criminal penalties for violating the Open Meetings Act. If there was found to be a walking quorum or an unauthorized meeting where deliberation was made, some action was taken, that action would wind up being void. And it's voidable through a civil suit that could be brought by a member of the public. The bigger issue is the criminal penalty. So if someone was to organize an unlawful meeting, for the review quorum, it's outside of public knowledge, or if you knowingly engaged in a walking quorum, then you would face a criminal violation, which could result in a $100 to $500 fine, 1 to 6 months in county jail, or both a fine and jail. So here are some best practices to keep in mind going forward. Just don't discuss cases outside of posted meetings. Don't email other public officials regarding ZBA matters. Don't post on Facebook, Twitter, or blog unless you're willing to risk a violation potentially. Try to avoid a quorum of ZBA members outside of posted meetings. And when we are actually in a meeting, just make sure you stick to the subject matter on the agenda. If you follow those, we should hopefully be okay. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. And that's.
Actually, excuse me, this is David. If I may, just to clarify on the walking quorum or questions come in, information comes from staff. So if we choose to reply or have a question, then we just really need to reply back to staff directly and not include other board members. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be recommended.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I did fail at the beginning to mention, I wanted to just cover, because we do have some new faces that will be part of the commission. So Mr. David James, who is joining us this evening, looks like we also have Mr. Robert Betcher, who has joined us. And then there is one other member, Darla Fonte, who will also be our third alternate. So Mr. James, Mr. Betcher, and Ms. Fonte will be our alternates. So we welcome them to the zoning board of adjustment. And then just to recap, so Mr. LaRocca will be, has been reappointed as the chair. And then Ms. Karen Lindsay, with Herb's departure from the board, Karen Lindsay was appointed to the vice chair position. So just a few little kind of housekeeping things, but thank you all again for your service. And that formally concludes our orientation, but we're happy to take any questions if you've thought of anything else in the meantime. Okay,
So,
thank you.
awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Shay. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Doug. Much appreciate y'all's time. Welcome, Rob, or welcome, David. Welcome to ZBA. You missed all the fun with the one portion that got removed, the simplistic one we always see. Since we don't have to do that anymore,
Sorry.
the meetings won't nearly be as exciting. Awesome, let's move forward. Item 6, minutes. Consideration of an action on the minutes of the September 15th, 2021 meeting. Does anyone have any corrections? Not hearing any. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
I move, go ahead.
I move to approve the minutes.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. For the record, we will do a roll call vote. When you hear your name, please give a yay or nay. Mr. Preveda?
Yay.
Ms. Peterson?
Yay.
Mr. Morden?
Yay.
Mr. James?
Yay.
And Ms. LaRocca is a yay. Minutes are approved. And we'll continue moving forward to item 7, public hearing. Receive and hear all persons desiring to be heard on a proposed special exception to the rear yard setback for 3811 Deer Run Bend, Lot 21, Block 1, Colony Woods, Section 1, in the restricted single-family residential R1R district. Doug.
As Lisa mentioned, there's new faces on ZBA, and we wanted to introduce our newest staff members as our tradition. We have with us Ms. Brittany Zhao. Brittany is Planner 1 with us. She's actually originally a Sugar Land native and has some additional planning experience, City of Victoria. So we're going to go ahead and let her give you her first special exception case, but just wanted to go ahead and do that.
Excellent. Welcome, Brittany.
Thank you.
Brittany, click the screen. Okay, there you go.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Nice to meet you all. So this property is located in the southeast side of Sugar Land below the Sweetwater Golf Course. As you can see here, it is part of this cul-de-sac on the edge of Deer Run Bend. This property was platted in 1988 as part of Colony Woods Section 1, and it was annexed in the city in 1997 and zoned as R1R. The applicant is proposing a one-story addition as well as a patio cover attached to the rear of the yard. When this property was platted, 11-foot build line was established, along with a 15-foot build line according to deed restrictions. However, according to R1R zoning, a 30-foot rear yard setback is required. Thus, the proposed one-story addition and patio cover, which would be attached to the rear of the house, would encroach the rear yard setback. The proposed addition would extend to 16 feet and 8.5 inches from the rear property line. Currently, the existing home extends to approximately 45 feet from the rear property line. The granting of this special exception would allow the proposed addition to meet the 11-foot build line originally established by the plat, as well as the 15-foot build line established by deed restrictions. Here you can see the existing site plan on the left, as well as the proposed site plan on the right. Currently, there is a pool and a pool deck, but those will be removed in order to make way for the proposed one-story addition, as well as the patio cover. And here you can also see this little sliver represents a wall. So this patio cover extends to 16 feet and 8.5 inches from the rear property line, but it does not encroach this 11-foot build line you see here. Here are various elevations of the proposed additions. This is the electrical plan, but it also serves as an aerial layout of the proposed one-story addition and the patio cover. Here's a view of the proposed additions from the left, from the front yard, as well as from the rear yard, and from the right side here, you can see the inside of the patio. And lastly, here is a Google excerpt. When staff conducted a neighborhood analysis, we found that overall, this property appears to be architecturally compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. We found that approximately 6 homes within 250 feet of the property do not meet the rear yard setback requirement of 30 feet. Additionally, staff has found that there are 13 similar special exceptions that have been approved within 250 feet of this property. This property meets the first 3 criteria of the special exception. First, it was platted prior to being annexed in the city. Second, its recorded restrictions are less restrictive than the setback established by R1R zoning. Third, the special exception is not less restrictive than recorded restrictions. And then the 4th criteria. Ultimately, staff has determined that this special exception would not be detrimental to public welfare or injurious to the surrounding neighborhood's health and appearance, and that there are no apparent issues. All requirements have been met for this evening's public hearing in compliance with development code and state law. Notification has been posted in the local newspaper and on the city website. Additionally, property owners within 200 feet of the subject property have been notified, and a sign has been posted on the front yard of the subject property. The local homeowners association has also been notified, and an online form has been made available for anyone who wishes to make comments prior to this meeting. However, staff has not received any inquiries and is not aware of any opposition to this special exception. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the special exception on the condition that the proposed one-story addition and patio cover are built in accordance with the attached site plan and the attached elevations. Staff will be more than happy to answer any questions that the commissioners may have after the public hearing. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. At this time, we will move forward and open the public hearing. Is there anyone present that is to make a presentation? Okay. Is there anyone else on the line? I don't see anybody else on the line or anyone in the room that would make a comment. So with no one here to make a comment, I'll close the public hearing and continue to move forward on the consideration of an action on a proposed special exception to the rear yard setback for 3811 Deer Run Bend, Lot 21, Block 1, Colonywood, Section 1, in the restricted single-family residential R1R district. This time we'll go through the 4 criteria. First criteria: the latest recorded plat of the property was approved prior to being annexed into the city. As we heard, the plat was recorded in 1988. The property was annexed into the city of Sugar Land in 1997. We're in agreement with that criteria?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Second criteria: the latest recorded plat or other recorded restriction for the property establishes a setback or other regulation that results in a setback that is less restrictive than the setback required by the City of Sugar Land Development Code, Chapter 2. As we heard, the recorded plat establishes an 11-foot rear yard setback. In addition, the deed restrictions require a setback of a lot less than 15 feet from the rear. In comparison, the R1R district requires a setback of not less than 30 feet for primary structures. We're in agreement with that criteria?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Third criteria, granting the special exception will not establish a setback that is less restrictive than the setback established by the latest approved plat or other recorded restriction. As we heard, the recorded plat for 3811 Deer Run Bend established an 11-foot rear yard setback adjacent to the rear property line, as well as the deed restrictions require a setback of not less than 15 feet from the rear. The applicant is not proposing to encroach on this recorded setbacks, and the special exception will not grant a setback that is less restrictive than the setback established on the plat or by recorded restrictions. We're in agreement with that third criteria?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And the fourth criteria, granting the special exception will not be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to the property or improvements in the district or neighborhood in which the property is located. At this point, I'll open up this fourth criteria. Is there any questions, clarifications that any of the board members have?
No.
Okay. Not hearing any questions or seeing anyone, raise a hand. Let me continue moving forward and say it's important to note, as y'all continue to evaluate this fourth criteria, that staff has examined the proposed special exception for three key aspects. The public safety review. There does not appear to be any public safety issues or concerns associated with this request. Second, proposal and the neighborhood from a rear yard setback comparison. As we heard, the proposed addition and patio cover appears to be compatible with the neighborhood based on an analysis of the surrounding area. There appear to be 6 homes in the area that do not appear to meet the rear yard setback of 30 feet, as well as there's 13 approved similar special exceptions in the area. And finally, the proposed patio cover addition is in compliance with the recorded plat and restrictions. And the third key aspect is a proposal as it relates to the neighborhood from an architectural standpoint. The proposed patio cover addition appears to be generally architecturally compatible with the existing single-family residence and neighborhood, and elevations can be included for certainty if we go that direction. So we've touched on the three key aspects. Let's kind of put a bow on this fourth criteria. Anyone have any concerns that approving this special exception would create a detrimental or injurious situation?
No.
Okay. All right. Seems like everyone is in agreement. Before we move forward, any lingering questions, comments that anyone has?
No.
Okay. So with that being said, is there a motion?
I move that the special exception to the rear yard setback requirements for the restricted single-family residential R1R district for the property located at 3811 Deer Run Bend, Lot 21, Block 1, Colony Woods, Section 1, be granted with the conditions that the addition and patio covered the residence be constructed in accordance with the site plan and elevations attached to the request for the special exception.
Okay, I have a motion from Mr. Morton. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion from Mr. Morton, a second from Mr. Preveda. We will roll call for the record. So when you hear your name, please give a yay or nay for approval of the special exception. Mr. Preveda.
Yay.
Ms. Peterson.
Yay.
Mr. Morton.
Yay.
Mr. James.
Yay.
And Mr. LaRocca is a yay as well. And the special exception is approved unanimously. We need to sign anything or do that post meeting? Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you.